Welcome to Sound the Horne Sports Show. I'm so excited to host this groundbreaking program that will broaden the Jackson sports scene's awareness regionally and nationally. My goal is to highlight sports in Jackson, the state of Mississippi, and nationally by utilizing my 25 years of Division I athletic administration knowledge, and my guests will be experienced leaders in sports. The guests on the show will share a behind-the-scenes, unique, and informative glance of the world of sports. Please join me every Monday and Friday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on WeBelieveDigital.com. Welcome to the Sound the Horne Sports Show. I am your host, Derek Horne. Today we have a great guest. I would like to welcome to the show Dr. Charles McClelland. Dr. McClelland is the commissioner of the SWAC and been a long-time friend, and I just want to thank you for being a part of the show today.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Derek.
How we like to usually do this starting off the show to give our viewers an opportunity to know a little bit about our guests. If you would, tell us a little bit about your hometown and the high school you attended.
Well, my hometown, I was actually born in Gulfport, Mississippi, although we were living in a small town called Sardis, Mississippi at the time. I stayed in Sardis from birth all the way up until fourth grade. And in 1980, we moved to Jackson, Mississippi, where my father became attendance center principal at Northwest Rankin. We got there, it was being built. He was the first attendance center principal. I went to Northwest Rankin from 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, Derek. Then I went to Powell Junior High School for 7th, 8th, 9th, and Callaway High School for my high school 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Back then, high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So Powell Junior High and Callaway High School, grew up in North Jackson.
A lot of great athletes have come out of the city of Jackson. When you were in high school, who were some of those athletes that you are very familiar with?
Well, my 10th grade year, I actually played on a team. We lost in the state championship against Chris Jackson, now Mahmoud Raouf, formerly of the Denver Nuggets. Back then, you had Darren Chancellor, you had Joseph Courtney. That team was loaded. You had a guy by the name of Jamie Knox. I think Jamie played for, I think it was Port Gibson, might not have been. They were like number 3 in the nation, but I remember Jamie went and played for Jim Valvano at North Carolina State. You had James Robinson in our class. Lindsey Hunter was in that class. So back then, Jackson put out a lot of professional basketball players. Othello Harrington, he went to Georgetown. So it was some pretty good basketball players back during that time, a lot better than I was.
I always like to ask those that have played sports at each level, how did your high school sports experience kind of shape you moving forward?
Well, it was very unique in shaping my path forward. I was not the best player in high school. As I always said, I wasn't necessarily the sharpest pencil in the pencil box either. And because of my lack of opportunities, I decided that I was going to attend Prairie View A&M University out in Prairie View, Texas, to try to continue to pursue my love for basketball. I didn't have a scholarship. I was attempting to walk on, as many others try to do, up until I got to Prairie View, and they had somewhat of a fiscal scandal, canceled their entire athletics program. I brought it back as a non-scholarship sport my sophomore year. So my freshman year, fall freshman year, they participated, canceled my spring freshman year, spring 90, brought it back as a non-scholarship in 1991, where they were welcoming everybody to participate. But as a non-scholarship Division I athletics program, we kind of all knew what was going to happen, which led to Prairie View breaking the nation's longest losing record in football, and I still think they own the nation's longest record in basketball. So quite a few of us that went to play decided not to play decided to concentrate on our studies. And because of that decision, I was able later to break into athletics, and it ultimately led me to become commissioner. So it's probably the first story in the history that you'll hear that not having the athletic ability led to becoming commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference.
I know that was a challenging time, but prior to, those experiences you had there, what kind of drew you to Prairie View? There's so many schools, in the Jackson area, in the state of Mississippi, Louisiana, surrounding areas, but what was it that drew you to Prairie View?
Well, I had made up my mind earlier that I wanted to leave Jackson and, experience something different. Being in Mississippi my entire life, I wanted to see I won't necessarily say what the world had to offer, but I wanted to see what was out there a little bit greater than Jackson. I had opportunity by my 11th grade year to have very limited travels. We had gone to Florida, we had gone to Disney World, we had gone to Atlanta, Chicago, but that was about it. I really wanted to experience something different. I had an uncle at the time that worked at Prairie View. He was the business dean, and I went to Prairie View. I went to Houston summer 1984. Had an opportunity to go to Prairie View, looked at the campus, liked the campus, but I really wanted to attend Florida A&M University. The other school was Alabama State. My mother and father graduated from Alcorn, applied to Alcorn, got accepted at Alcorn, but again, really didn't necessarily want to stay in the state. And it really was my uncle, Milton Bryant, that persuaded me that from an academic standpoint, Prairie View was my best option. So after visiting there second time, after talking to my uncle and looking at it from a sports perspective, Prairie View was in the SWAC. I was a SWAC guy. I wanted to stay in Black college athletics. And I thought Prairie View afforded me the best chance to be able to play basketball and also achieve my academic goals.
You shared a little bit about some of the trials that you had as a student and walking on. How would you say Prairie View kind of shaped you into the role that you ascended to in athletic administration?
Well, Prairie View gave me my start. My start as athletics director was not your normal start. And had it not been for Prairie View, I absolutely would not be athletic director at Prairie View, Texas Southern, or commissioner. And because of the fiscal scandal that happened and the elimination of the programs, Prairie View brought it back as a non-scholarship sport. From the years of 1991 to 1998, we participated in all 18 Division I sports in the SWAC, but with 0 scholarships. Then President Charles Hines brought it back with 13 scholarships. So we participated in minimally across the board. So in football, we had 13. Everybody else had between 55 and 63. But from that time when I graduated in 1993 all the way up until 2001 when I became athletic director, because Prairie View did not have that strong infrastructure from an athletic standpoint, I got an opportunity to be golf coach. I got an opportunity to be on the radio network calling football and basketball games. I had the opportunity to be on the oversight committee, which we call it the Athletic Council, was the oversight body for collegiate athletics. I had the opportunity to go to a lot of the SWAC meetings. So as I maneuvered my way through Prairie View A&M University, I had that athletic experience that, quite frankly, I would not have received had I been at any other Division I institution. And Charles Hines saw something in me, elevated me up to become athletics director. Quite frankly, after serving in a lot of different roles, and I do want to make a point there, Derek, my background, again, primarily was not athletics. It started in the accounting office. And then I moved to the financial aid office, and then I moved to architecture. And ironically, what made us successful at Prairie View is I had the fiscal background and the fiscal knowledge of how the system worked to be able to develop, sound budgets. And how we moved from 13 scholarships in football to 63 scholarships in football was granting aids and understanding financial aid and working with the financial aid director to package our student athletes first. So we went from 13 to 63 in football based upon that financial aid knowledge that I received. And as you know, APR was just starting to begin in that 2003, 2004 era. So my experience in the academic realm, working with the provost office, working with the deans, kind of helped me. So I was able to get that training across the university spectrum, not necessarily knowing that it was going to assist me in becoming athletic director and being successful.
You know, I think in you sharing that, it sheds a lot of light onto how you understand not only on campus but the conference as a whole. I've worked with you closely, and I see how your mind works as it relates to making sure that you have an understanding in totality of how structure should be set up. Now, one thing I want you to kind of share a little bit, because so many people don't realize the impacts of those scholarships you just mentioned. As an administrator working with a coach, how do you convince them to be successful knowing that you got 13 scholarships on one side of the field and you got 63 on the other? How hard is it to really work with your coach to motivate them to be successful?
Well, at the time, it was extremely difficult. Not only were you working against the lack of scholarships, you were working against the reputation that Prairie View was the worst athletics program in the nation. As a matter of fact, ESPN did a special, and they named the top 10 worst programs in America ever: sports, professional sports, minor league sports, collegiate. And Prairie View was number one on that list. Keep in mind, we lost 80 straight football games. When I became athletics director, I think we won our first game in 1988. We beat Langston. And when I became athletic director in 2001, I think we had only won 3 more football games. We had won 4 games in the last 10 or 11 years. So a lot of it was based upon the vision that we had and trying to sell coaches on that vision. The second piece of it really was getting people that were like-minded and had the same motivation that I had. We're not going to take failure as an option. A lot of the coaches that we hired, they were young, they were hungry coaches, and they were not necessarily that concerned about what we had, but the plan that we inputted into the process in order to get where we wanted to be. And those coaches having input in that overall plan. And, the biggest, and the most brightest within the Southwestern Athletic Conference has always been in the sport of football. And we had a lot of failures in the sport of football. It wasn't until I hired Henry Frazier from Bowie State. And you talk about how do you sell coaches? Well, we actually got Henry Frazier from Bowie State. They actually had worse facilities and less scholarships. So for Henry Frazier, it was a step up. For us, we were taking a chance on a coach that had not necessarily proven himself at the Division I level. But what did we have to lose? So it was a perfect marriage for us. It took them some time, and everything just kind of came together. We worked on baseball. We got Michael Robinson. He's at Texas Southern now. I hired him at Prairie View. He was the only African-American coach in the state of Texas that took the only African-American baseball team to the state championship. So again, it was a step up for him. He didn't even have a baseball field. So as we put all of these plans together, we started to do the types of things in order to get us going. And then we started making, some more hires. We hired Jerome Francis from the University of Houston. This was only after we had increased scholarships and was able to get salaries up. Cynthia Cooper at the time, we got her from the Phoenix Mercury. She was the head coach at the Phoenix Mercury. She had stepped down and we had hired her. So all of these things started to come together at the same time, and we just got that momentum and started rolling. But it was similar individuals with similar goals. We all had something to prove, and Prairie View was the right proving ground for us.
Well, the reason I like to share that is because I know you have been in conversations, and I have, serving in athletic administration and being on both ends, different ends of the spectrum at the PWI and HBCU. A lot of viewers don't understand the dynamics of what FCS is, HBCU sports are, and the challenge they have is they try and I guess you would say compare Texas A&M to a Prairie View. And that's not even apples and oranges. That's like apples and cherries.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I've seen some people write, about that information. What a lot of people don't know is that Texas A&M was founded on one day, and Prairie View was founded the day after in 1876. So Prairie View and Texas A&M has been a part of the Texas A&M system from day one. Texas A&M is one day older than Prairie View A&M University. And Prairie View was founded for the newly freed slaves, and they needed a form of education. So obviously, as most schools, they were teaching individuals how to teach, so they could teach the newly freed slaves. And there is a fund called the Permanent University Fund, the PUF Fund, which is that oil money everybody's talking about now with the Jimbo Fisher and the Nick Saban. But Prairie View is a part of the PUF Fund along with the University of Texas. But Prairie View's cut is only about 1%. I don't know the exact numbers of that overall fund. So when you look at a Texas A&M athletic budget, right now you're talking about over $250 million, where Prairie View's athletic budget is somewhere in the $12 to $15 million range at this point. So even when you start looking at the funding of the overall institution, Texas A&M, you're talking, probably over $1 billion, where Prairie View is nowhere near that. So when you start looking at facilities, you start looking at salaries, you start looking at scholarships, you start looking at travel, you start even looking at, how many people come to the game, how much television exposure you get. There is absolutely zero comparison to where Texas A&M is and where Prairie View A&M University is. But from a competitive standpoint, Prairie View has been as competitive in the FCS ranks and even in some sports outside of the FCS ranks as Texas A&M. And if you look at the whole span of Prairie View, when they started competing in the Southwestern Athletic Conference in 1920, obviously integration changed a lot of that in the 60s. But if you were a stellar athlete, Prairie View was more prevalent than Texas A&M was. It's just in this recent area where money and television have kind of shifted the paradigm.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you shared that knowledge about the system, because I was very well aware of it. And what I want to do is put a pin in that time right now. As we end the first quarter, we're going to take a little break and give our sponsors an opportunity to share some insight with our viewers.
Are you tired of living check to check and looking for residual income? We have just the opportunity for you. Join us on Saturday, the 25th of June in Jackson, Mississippi, as we discuss the sexiest industry in the world, travel. Let's turn your passion into profits, whether it's on a full-time or part-time basis. Please RSVP or text to 404-915-8626. We look forward to connecting and taking flight. See you soon.
Hi, I'm Q Talicia Garrett. I am here to introduce our New South Development and Training Outreach Hour every Tuesday at 2 p.m., giving you information on how to become a part of the programs through USDA and Farm Service Agency. We can be reached at 678-779-9468. We can also be found online at newsouthoutreach.com.
Welcome back to the second quarter of the Sound the Horne Sports Show. We have Dr. Charles McClelland on, the commissioner of the SWAC, and we had some great dialogue that we shared about Prairie View and its relationship with Texas A&M. As we go into this second quarter, one thing I like to do, and I like to ask administrators, if you would, just maybe share some of your reflections, particularly from your first year serving as athletic director at Prairie View.
Well, that's interesting. I think the biggest reflection that I have, and it's kind of guided the way that I do business now, is that, I came into position. I was the youngest athletic director in the nation at the time. I got the job at 29, taking over one of the most difficult program turnarounds that probably has had to occur. And the one thing that I knew was that going into the athletic conference room, there were several, probably all, individuals in that room that were smarter than I as it related to athletic administration, athletic oversight. And I think the biggest thing that I could reflect on was having to understand that I am not all-knowing. I'm not smarter than the individuals in the room, and having to get them to buy into the overall vision, but also respecting their knowledge and their position. And most times people come in and say, hey, I'm the boss, do what I tell you to do. And I tried not to do that. I tried to say, hey, this is a team effort. Let's get together as a group and identify the strategies for moving forward. We all know where we want to be, and that is the best overall athletics program in the SWAC. But let's talk about as a group, how do we do it, given the limitations in resources and scholarships and facilities. And I think if I had to rely on one thing, it was really learning, humbleness in the overall process, because sometimes you take 2 steps forward and you get pulled back 10 steps because you didn't have a lot. So in that first year, it was really just learning and trying to gain the respect of individuals that had been in athletics administration for years. Coach Gillard, Clifton Gillard, he's deceased now, but he was former athletics director, former football coach, former track coach, former everything. And he was my assistant athletics director. His son was older than I was. Coach Gillard had more years of experience in athletics than I had in life, right? And learning, how to work with those individuals. And they all received me, so graciously. Ken Houston, a gold jacket Hall of Famer for the NFL, Alvin Reed, Clem Daniels, those guys reaching out to me saying, hey, Charles, we're behind you. We're going to support you, was humbling and overwhelming. And just learning how to work through a lot of those challenges of gaining the respect and getting everybody on the same page. And that was a lot of work to have been done. But I would think in reflection, that was probably what I remember the most, and probably the lesson that I've tried to instill and continue today. And that is, try to gain the respect of the individuals that you work for. Allow them to have input in the overall direction, and ultimately you will achieve it together.
One thing that you talked about that I think we need to do a better job of is making sure people understand the impact that our athletes had in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I'm a fan of just sports. My father played football at Albany State. My mother played basketball at Albany State. So I've been following HBCUs for a while. And you mentioned Florida A&M. I worked there, but not only did I work there, I grew up in the shadows of it, grew up in South Georgia and the Jake Gaithers and all those things. And if you could, you mentioned Ken Houston and a few others. Who are some of those other Prairie View legends that might need to be referenced that sometimes get overlooked?
Well, there's a ton of them, and you put me on the spot. So when I forget to say one, I'm going to get in trouble. But, in the sport of basketball, you have Zelmo Beatty, which really kind of, back in Zelmo Beatty days, there was nobody that was going to beat Prairie View. And then you go even further back, Charlie Choo-Choo Brackens, quarterback for Prairie View, made it to the NFL, first black quarterback. But Billy Nix, he was up there with, icons of college football names. When you talk Eddie Robinson, you had to talk Billy Nix. So Prairie View, and this is what a lot of people don't know about Prairie View. Prairie View Interscholastic League was the state championship. You had to come to Prairie View if you were African American to participate in the state championship. So before integration, it was just at Prairie View. So all of the best athletes came to Prairie View. So in the state of Texas, so when it came to recruit, Prairie View had its pick of the litter. So when you go back and you look at the history, and that's why it was so intimidating becoming athletics director at Prairie View, all of that history. And then you had those years of downtrodden, even Barbara Jacket, she's coached, the Olympics. Fred Newhouse, gold medalist. I mean, you could just go on and on and on. But Prairie View had that history and tradition, all the way up until, we hit those hard times in the 90s. And, there's just a lot of, even, outside of athletics, a lot of people don't know Mr. T, he's a Prairie View graduate. He was tied to the athletic department. So Clover Lane from Rocky, that's Mr. T, Tracy Ellis from In Vogue. Those are all people that we were proud of back in the 80s and 90s. So Prairie View has a very rich tradition, not only from an athletic standpoint, but an entertainment standpoint and clearly from an academic standpoint.
Well, when you mentioned how the state championships used to be on campus at Prairie View, it makes me think about, the time that I sat in the chair at Florida A&M and learning about Jake Gaither. Jake Gaither would keep his coaches in state, and not coaches, but his student athletes. And when they graduated, they became high school coaches. So
right.
Basically what he had was a pick of the litter, because he would put his coaches in high school, he would put his players back in high school and was able to channel them back to Florida A&M. And I enjoy learning those uniquenesses because it brings you a little closer to those institutions that you serve. But then it also gives you a good understanding of how we had to do it in the past and maybe how we might need to take a look at it in the future, because what it comes down to is relationships. Right. How you build those relationships and how sustainable are they? And I think that's the key.
That's absolutely correct. And we talk about integration and Black student athletes being able to go to majority institutions, and a lot of that changed. Prairie View primarily, as well as all of our HBCUs, they were primarily schools of education, teaching people how to teach the underserved, the African-American community that was coming up. And that was really prevalent all the way up until the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And then you started to see the field starting to open up, engineering and accounting and becoming a doctor. And I know we're going to get into Texas Southern, their development, and reason why Texas Southern was originally formed was education. But then they got the Sweat decision, which ultimately made Texas Southern have the opportunity to become a school that had law as one of its primary focus. But the concept stayed the same, educating those individuals and then putting them out and then sending those individuals back to be able to assist with institutions. I had somebody that asked me, about the talent going to majority schools. And I think, my answer kind of shocked some individuals. And my point was there were a lot of people that died for the right for anyone to go anywhere. So if an African-American student athlete wanted to go to a majority institution, there were a lot of people that fought and died for that. As a conference athletic director and a conference commissioner, I'm longing for the day and doing everything within our power for them to, in masses, you're starting to see that change now where we're starting to become the first choice of a lot of those student athletes now. But I long for the day where, SWAC, all 12 SWAC schools are in the top 12 of the polls because all of the talent are coming back to the schools. But I'm starting to see that, pride starting to come back. And a lot of it has to do with exactly what you said, relationships. So all of us have choices. A lot of people died for us to have these choices. So I don't knock anybody that want to explore an opportunity. But at the same time, there's no greater opportunity. There's no greater institution. You can achieve everything that you want to achieve at our membership institutions within the Southwestern Athletic Conference.
Well, we kind of started this quarter talking about some of the challenges that you had experienced when you took over the job at Prairie View, and knowing what you've dealt with. A lot of people might not have known that, and I'm glad you shared that with them. But what were some of those successes that you experienced there? Because under your leadership, you won 18 SWAC championships. So if you would maybe just share some of your, or share your formula for success to turn the program around.
Well, I think the formula for success is having people better and smarter than you surrounding you, assisting in the direction and getting out of the way so smarter individuals can get the job done. I think for me, the first championship that I won, it was a basketball regular season championship. I think that was probably, the most memorable because it showed the other sports that it could be done. We did win 18 championships at Prairie View. That was the most, and I mean, that combined 18 was the most combined since 1964. I left Prairie View in 2008. When I left in 2008, we had the only women's basketball championship in the history, the first ever winning season. We had the first basketball regular season championship since 1964. We had the first baseball championship since 1964. We had the first tennis championship since the 1960s. And we had, I think, at the most 4 championships in 1 year, which was the most that we had at any one single time. We won the C.D. Henry Award the year that I left. And, quite honestly, I left spring of 2008, and in the fall of 2008, the football team won the SWAC championship, which was their first championship since the 1960s, and they ultimately won the Commissioner's Cup that year. So although I can't take credit for it, I do take credit for putting them in position to achieve those. So we went from the nation's worst athletics program to being the SWAC's best athletics program with the lowest budget in the SWAC. When I left Prairie View A&M University, believe this, we had a budget of $3.4 million. That was in 2008. And you had some teams spending $12, $13, $14 million. We had the best overall program on a $3.1 million budget.
Well, you're speaking to somebody that understands that language. But I think what you were able to do, and I've been asked that question. I think a lot of times you can't worry about what you don't have. You have to accentuate what you do have. And I think when you take a look at some of the challenges, and I applaud you for it, but I'm not surprised because I know you, and I know the, I know the intensity of Dr. McClelland, but I also know the passion and the compassion, not only for sports, but for student athletes as a whole. So I'm not surprised in the turnaround that you made, and I'm glad that we had a chance to share that with folks, because when the media comes out, they'll put that worst 10 list out there, but they don't turn around and come back and show the changes that you've made.
No, they do not.
And I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I think it's so important for us to write the record when we had that opportunity to. So as we go ahead and close out this second quarter, we're going to put a pin in Prairie View. We're going to talk about and get ready to move into that transition into going to Texas Southern. And right now we're going to give our sponsors an opportunity to share some information with our viewers.
SGECOVIDsolutions.com is paving the way forward for a safer city government, delivering cutting-edge biosecurity and biosafety protocols developed internationally by top virologists and scientists using an all-natural cleaning solution, killing COVID-19 on contact like no other product on the international market. For more information, please call 1-800-281-9080 or visit us online at SGECOVIDsolutions.com. Let SGECOVIDsolutions.com provide innovative rapid facilities testing and world-class state-of-the-art biorisk safety protocols for all of your coronavirus needs. Call 1-800-281-9080 or visit us online at SGECOVIDsolutions.com.
Welcome back to the third quarter of the Sound of Sports, Sound of Horne Sports Show, and we're here with Dr. Charles McClelland. We put a pin in your time over at Prairie View, and we're going to transition into your time over at Texas Southern. And my question to you is, what kind of attracted you from moving from Prairie View to Texas Southern?
One person, Dr. John Rutley, the president. He presented an opportunity for me to make that transition. Obviously, I'm going from Prairie View to my arch rival. The Prairie View constituents were not really happy with me. As I stated, we had just kind of turned the corner at Prairie View. We just started to have some success. But what President Rudley put together was a package that I could not turn down. And I'm not necessarily talking about financial. I'm talking about the opportunity to grow as a person and to grow as a professional. Prairie View only being 45 miles northwest of Houston, it's still in Waller County, it's still in a rural area. Texas Southern is right on the outside of downtown Houston. The pace is faster. Everything was just turned up, tenfold. And Dr. Rudley basically turned the keys of Texas Southern University athletics over to me. And I had an opportunity to grow, exponentially. As I talked about Dr. Charles Hines, the president at Prairie View, ultimately giving me that AD's job off of faith. He had faith in me. It wasn't necessarily anything that I had shown. President Hines changed my life for the better. President John Rudley changed my life for the better. It was a bigger budget. It was a much bigger budget. As a matter of fact, it doubled in size plus some. And he put me in an arena, quite frankly, Derek, that allowed me to harness the skill set that I needed in order to be able to take that next progressive step. And when I looked at the decision, it really came down to, do I stay at Prairie View and I remain comfortable because I can stay here forever? Or do I push the envelope and try to expand my knowledge and expand my skill set? And I chose the latter. And at the time, my two young boys, Kanan and Ashton, made a deal with me. They did not want me to go to Texas Southern. They were diehard Prairie View. And the deal was, as long as I did not move, that they would give me permission to leave Prairie View and go to Texas Southern. So where I had a 15-minute drive to Prairie View, the next day when I made the decision to go to Texas Southern, I had an hour and 15-minute drive. But the fact that President Rudley, persuaded me, Charles, let's do something different. Let's enhance. This is totally different. Although you're in the same conference, it's totally different. You need something different. And he put a package together that I just couldn't refuse.
Well, one thing that a lot of people might hear about is dealing with what is called the academic progress rate, APR, and then also the graduation success rate. And when you took over the helm at Texas Southern, what was your approach to improving those rates?
Well, I got hit upside the head first there a couple of times. So it kind of changed my approach as it went. Now, keep in mind, when I went to Texas Southern, we were already on probation for NCAA violations. We were already being investigated, unbeknownst to me, for some violations that were already ongoing. I knew that we had the nation's lowest APR rate, academic progression rate, and we had the nation's lowest overall graduation rate. So I knew coming in that we had some challenges, and probably more like most situations in that regard. When you get there, you find out more, or you find out things that you had not uncovered prior to actually putting boots on the ground. So we had to adjust 2 or 3 different times, but it was clear that we had to clean up compliance because we were out of chances with the NCAA. It was clear that we had to clean up academics because had we not cleaned it up, by that time the NCAA was putting teams on postseason ban. And without being able to compete in conference championships, you might as well shut the athletics program down. So that was a great level of incentive for the administration to kind of make the types of pivots and the types of changes that we needed to make. And one of those was going out and really spending the money to put the individuals, as I talked about earlier, that had the knowledge and the expertise in the areas to kind of turn it around. A lot of it was integrating ourselves into structures within the institution that we had not normally been a part of, such as the academic community, such as the committees that did, certain programs, such as the academic oversight of what good academic standing was, right? That was totally an academic committee, but we actually be a part of it because when you start talking about academic standing, that rule has a lot to do with eligibility of student athletes. Not that we were changing anything, but here's that additional information. I recall one particular area where Texas Southern had and still has a general studies program. And there was somewhat of a movement to kind of do away with general studies. And my response to it was that I would rather for students and student athletes to graduate than not to graduate at all. At the time, Texas Southern had a 13% graduation rate, which meant that 87% of their students was not graduating at all. I would prefer for them to graduate with something, but nothing at all. And there was this misnomer that, well, student athletes are in general studies. So we actually did a chart, and 47% of our student athletes were in the arts and sciences. Only, I think it was like 13% was in general studies, and it was more of a holding area. So as we started to look at all of these different deals, integrate ourselves in all of these different academic communities, started to change the staff and get people that was knowledgeable. Our APR at the time that I got there was a 735. When I asked the NCAA what that equated to in the graduation rate, they didn't know because they said it didn't go that low. It equated to approximately a 29% graduation rate. When we left overall, our APR went from a 785 to a 963. It's up to like a 980 something now. So they've continued to do great work, and that graduation rate is in that 75, 80 percentile. So totally, Texas Southern did business academically, but it was really out of necessity. We had no choice, or the NCAA was going to shut us down.
Well, I'm glad you shared those percentages of graduation, because a lot of people don't realize student athlete population graduates at a higher percentage than the general population. And
yes,
by design for what you have to do from an athletic standpoint, or progress toward degree and a number of other things that are set in place, it gives your student athletes a better opportunity to make a progression to graduate and get something meaningful, because if you want to play, you got to pass. And
a lot of it too came from, again, bringing knowledgeable people in that understood all of this. So a lot of people look at APR and graduation rate as a singular item, and they're not singular items. So when you start looking at graduation rates, you have the federal rate, and then you have the graduation student success rate from the NCAA. The federal rate is first-time, full-time freshmen that have enrolled. The NCAA rate is everybody that came in that year cohort, whether they were a transfer or not. So you have to merge those two items and handle them separately. But when I say they're not singular items, one overlays with another. First-time, full-time freshman is one item, but then you add in transfers. So then we had to start to adjust what we did for transfer. So we said you must have 2 years remaining on your clock, and you must have at least a 2.5 grade point average, because we noticed that transferring in, we could take that and we could get you out. But we also noticed from an academic progression rate, it wasn't that our student athletes were graduating at a 29% rate. They were graduating with a 29% rate at the time frame in which the NCAA said you had to graduate. So then we had to start changing the way that we did business. So it wasn't that they were not graduating. They were stopping out, right? They did not have enough money to be able to finish. So we had to get post money to be able to bring them back once they were off scholarships to be able to graduate. So it wasn't just a singular item. There were so many different things that went into that rate that when the public sees graduation rate, they just say, oh, they're not graduating then. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case. I remember one particular instance that we fought vigorously with the NCAA. We had a student athlete that had graduated with honors. As a matter of fact, they had a 3.7. And there were 11 student athletes in this particular cohort that they had flagged. But because their change of major form was filled out and was misfiled, and their change of major did not carry over, they were deemed ineligible. So they came in, let's say, under business when they filled out their application, but they never enrolled in business. They enrolled in chemistry. They took all chemistry classes, graduated in honors with chemistry, but they were deemed not to have been eligible and not to have been counted because the change of major form was never turned in. So it's those types of intricacies that we had to learn, get accustomed to, learn how to fight, learn how to correct. And ultimately, that's true across the board. So for the listening public, a lot of these graduation rates and APR rates, it's just not that singular, this person came and didn't graduate. There's a lot that goes into that process, and it takes resources to be able to get competent and knowledgeable people that understands the process to enter into our institutions and be able to correct these items.
I know when I left Ole Miss and went to work at Florida A&M, my former boss, Pete Boone, shared the same thing that you shared. He said that he was on that CAPS committee when they designed APR, and he said that it really wasn't that students going to HBCUs did not have the wherewithal to complete the coursework. It's just a support and also to the guidance they would have while they were there. And it sounds like you took the bull by the horns, because you're in Texas, you grab them Longhorns anyway. You took the bull by the horn and straighten that out. And I think that so many times, I think that we as administrators, particularly not just HBCUs, but FCS and small, low resource institutions, we have to talk to each other in other member institutions to see how you can get it done. He is now the AD at Alabama State, but Dr. Jason Cable and I had a chance to go to Alcorn at the same time. And as you were talking about what you did, I tell people Jason Cable probably is one of the best ones to work with when it comes to dissecting a problem and making remedies and putting them in place that can be useful. And we have to realize that as administrators and our alumni and fan base need to realize if you can't remain eligible, if you don't meet those APR standards, then postseason play, it's not even in the thoughts. So important for the university to partner with athletic administration to have that understanding of what their support should be. Now, Dr. McClelland, we're getting ready to close out this third quarter, but what I really want to do when we come back, were you on the management council when you were at Texas Southern?
At Prairie View.
At Prairie View. Well, what I want to do is want to talk a little bit about that because people need to understand the magnitude of what that role is, particularly having members that are not at the Power Five to be on that where that voice can be heard. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to take a break and we're going to give our sponsors an opportunity to share some information, and we're going to learn a little bit more about the Management Council and the workings of the NCAA.
Are you tired of living check to check and looking for residual income? We have just the opportunity for you. Join us on Saturday, the 25th of June in Jackson, Mississippi, as we discuss the sexiest industry in the world, travel. Let's turn your passion into profits, whether it's on a full-time or part-time basis. Please RSVP or text to 404-915-8626. We look forward to connecting and taking flight. See you soon.
Advertise on WeBelieve.global, a brand new digital media platform. Share your brand with our audience on our many global live stream TV broadcasts and over the radio. For more info, visit WeBelieve.global or call 800-492-5186, option 1.
Welcome back to the fourth quarter of the Sound the Horn Sports Show, and we're going to try and close it out strong with Dr. Charles McClelland, Commissioner of the SWAC. And one thing that I would like for him to share a little bit about is the Management Council within the structure of the NCAA and what it means to really be involved with that group.
Well, that was the group that approved APR. That was the group that will approve this new transformation constitution, although it's not called a management council anymore. It's still the same group of leaders appointed by conferences. And it was the most powerful group that's out there, in my opinion, because they are the ones that enact the rules and regulations. So if somebody comes up with a rule, it has to go through that group to be voted in. And then obviously the board of directors gives its stamp of approval. But during that time that I was on, it really was about academics. It was about, making sure that this APR piece was, all together. And even sitting on that council, I did not know all of the intricacies. You got the topical view of it, but, the management council, and then it was split, and I think it's called the Leadership Council now. Or I think they split it was Management and Leadership Council, and it's going to be called something else in this new constitution. But again, it's representation across all of Division I that will create, approve, and process the rules and regulations of the membership.
One thing that we like to do now is move from Texas Southern to moving into the SWAC, becoming commissioner of the SWAC. Kind of share with us some of your impressions of your first 90 days moving into that seat and some of the expectations that you had for the conference.
Well, I think I was overwhelmed over the significance of the conference office and what it means to so many people. Being an athletic director, you focus in on your school and your constituents, but to be commissioner and you find the passion of all 10, now 12, but you talk about the 90 days, the 10 schools, was humbling and again, overwhelming. And you realize the gravity of the position that you hold and how important it is. And in those 90 days, as we talked about, we thought back about the legends of Prairie View and then the legends of Texas Southern. Now I think back about the legends of all 10 member institutions, which are too many to even name in an hour show. And to say it's your responsibility to uphold the values and the standards. So I think in the first 90 days, I probably sat and just stared at the wall, Derek, just trying to take it all in as to how overwhelming of a responsibility it was and how humbled I was to be the person that the council chose to lead the program into the future.
Well, at that time, the capacity that I served, I was excited for you to take on that role because I could watch from afar. And number one, you knew the conference. You understood the needs of what it means of sitting in the chair as an athletic director. And the lines of communication were truly improved because I think it's tough for somebody that has not walked that walk to turn around and try and talk that talk to individuals they have to work closely with. And from afar, I've noticed that working with you closely, I experienced that. And I know that from what I've seen over the past couple of years since you've been there, I know that your plan is coming to fruition because what people don't realize, you're a very competitive person, but you have a poker face. But,
absolutely. I would say, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I would say one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear is that the commissioner makes this decision. The commissioner has done that. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And what people don't know, some don't know, is that this is a collaborative decision-making process. Every decision that is made on behalf of the conference has conference vote. Right. There is no constitution, no bylaw, no television contract, no sponsorship contract, no direction, no schedule, no anything that is enacted within the Southwestern Athletic Conference without a vote of the coaches, the ADs, the SWAs, and the presidents. So my role and responsibility is to put all of that together and make sure that we have a uniform approach in doing this. And I think that's what makes this conference great, is that our leadership structure is requiring the membership to be actively involved in the forward progression of the conference. And as long as we stay on the same page, there's not going to be anybody, any entity, anything that's going to be able to stop us. And I could proudly say for the first time in quite a long time, all 12 of our member institutions are on the same page. And that's why you see the positive forward progression of this conference. It's not because of Charles McClelland. It's because of the outstanding leadership that's on campus.
And a part of that too, though, Dr. McClelland, is that you see how to make that work. And it goes back to what you said when you took the job at Prairie View. You put the people that know what needs to be done in position to do it, and then you're there to support and or lead to make sure it gets done, and it's evident in that. And I applaud you for that, and encourage you to keep up that work.
I appreciate it. You were a great help when you were at Alcorn. You and I, like you say, we go back a long way, and even when there are disagreements, because there's always going to be disagreements, I think the personal relationships that you and I and the other ADs had was invaluable, because, again, I understood where the individual campuses were coming from because I was in your shoes. So it made it a lot easier for me to make the adjustment to say, I understand, Alcorn, this is what you're looking at, because I was looking at the exact same thing 6 months ago. And it allowed us to maneuver through all that we had to maneuver through, and it made us stronger as a conference, and it made us stronger as an overall entity, being able to move forward and getting the things done. All of the successes that we've been able to enjoy over the last 4 years has, again, been a part solely of the leadership that has been on campus, starting with, the coaches, the equipment managers. Everybody plays a part. And because we're all on the same page, doesn't mean that we don't disagree. But we're on the same page, and we're going to continue to grow and continue to be stronger.
I think one of the biggest things that has impacted collegiate athletics or our nation as a whole is COVID-19 and the challenges that we had to deal with. What were some of the things from a conference perspective that you had to work through to make sure that the conference could move forward during those times?
Part of our exponential growth happened in COVID. So, where the nation was shut down, there was a whole lot of work going on within the Southwestern Athletic Conference. I often reference George Floyd and the tragedy of Mr. Floyd. And his daughter said, my father is going to change the world. And my response, in more ways than she could have even imagined. And it opened up the ability for SWAC to be seen, the decision for us to move to spring football and spring sports put us in a area in which people that normally would not have watched us had to watch us, because we were the only football game on that entire spring. And you know what? They enjoyed it. Sponsors started to see us. Different entities started to see us, and our brand started to grow. So within COVID, we quickly began to realize that there was a tremendous opportunity for growth, and we kind of focused on that growth. We focused on growth and being able to be seen more nationally on television, to garner additional corporate partners, to be able to bring in 2 institutions, Florida A&M and Bethune-Cookman, to be able to strengthen our financial wherewithal, not necessarily from additional revenue, but setting ourselves up to get additional revenue once COVID-19 was over with. And then obviously understanding the health and safety and the mental aspects of our student athletes. And we've talked a lot about administration, but I think from the student athlete perspective, I personally learned more in that 2-year time frame, from when it started, when we had to stop in the spring of 20 all the way up until the fall of 22. I learned more about, student athlete, mental awareness, their mental health, what they were focused on. Because quite frankly, as we were talking about canceling sports and not participating, the fair majority of our student athletes said, we need sports, that we want to be on campus. We want you to keep us safe. But being on campus, going to school, participating in intercollegiate athletics is one of the most constant things that we've ever had in our lives. And to lose that means that we've lost a huge piece. So, Commissioner, we want you to figure out a way to where we can do this, but we want to do it safely. So we learned so much, and it has made our conference become a much more stronger conference and much more student athlete centered, in my opinion, than we've been in quite a long time.
Well, as administrator that was out in the field working with it, I think that you hit it right on the head. I think our student athletes need to be applauded because they really worked hard, put themselves in a position, and there were certain protocols, and those protocols were tough, being tested 3 times a week and having, the social distancing and all those things, and to see them do all that, get their coursework, and then respond. They need to be applauded for that. Now, I think it made us look at athletics and really how we do things in a different light.
It did.
And
it did.
A lot of the things that have been put in place, if something to that magnitude happens again within a short time frame, we are nimble enough to pivot and to make those decisions that need to be made. And from being on the campus and being engaged with that, hiring coaches, had to do it virtually. Just so many things that you were not comfortable with, you had to be able to do. And it was something that was a learning experience. And I think that we all grew stronger from that.
Yeah, it changed the way athletics is looked at. It changed the way that we have done business. And I don't think even from a campus administrator, there's probably not going to be another more difficult task to have been tackled than COVID-19. So hats off to everyone.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left in this quarter, and you serve on a committee that I think that a lot of people just don't really know what you have to deal with. I know because I've tried to call you from time to time, and all we can do is text. But if you would talk a little bit about your participation with the Men's Division I Basketball Committee and how that's structured.
Well, again, one of the most rewarding committees that I've been on, the Division I Men's Basketball Committee, is responsible for the entire gamut of March Madness, from selection of the 68 teams to seeding to running the sites to ultimately running the Final Four. We have multiple meetings with our television partners, Turner, CBS, sponsors, just across the gamut. So that 12 is now 12, it was 10 when I joined. That 12-member committee runs March Madness, obviously with the support of hundreds of people, the NCAA staff. But it is a monumental task, but it is also rewarding. It's $1 billion industry. So, they thoroughly vet you. They just don't let anybody do anything on that committee. They have everything. They tell you where to go, when to eat, what to eat, when to go to the bathroom. So it's pretty structured, but it's for a good cause. And that revenue ultimately helps run, this enterprise that we call the NCAA. So very rewarding. It's a 5-year appointment, very time consuming. I think I had 7 conferences this year. So when games are going on, we are responsible for watching everybody, all games, but you're primarily responsible for 3 to 4 conferences. And then you have secondary responsibility for another 3 or 4 conferences. So my responsibility was to look at these conferences, know everything that there was to know. And when we got in the committee room, to answer any and all questions on top of all of the matrix that we had to go through, the net and all of these rankings, the Ken Palm rankings, the BPI rankings, the ESPN rankings, the net rankings are on top. I mean, we have all of these spreads. We have 4 computers in front of us full of information. And our responsibility is to sort through all of that and try to pick the top 68 and place the top 68. So it's a monumental task, but again, one of the most rewarding that I've been a part of.
Well, we've come to the conclusion of our 4th quarter, and what I like to do is, Dr. McClelland, thank you so much for being a guest, and I appreciate your friendship through these years and also your support. And before we get out of here, I want to make sure that I send out a shout to my wife. We're celebrating our 24th wedding anniversary today, so I want to be able to go home in peace.
Working on your anniversary. Congratulations.
Thanks so much. But Commissioner, thanks so much, and I look forward to catching up with you soon and also catching up with our viewers soon. And everyone have a great day. Welcome to Sound the Horne Sports Show. I'm so excited to host this groundbreaking program that will broaden the Jackson sports scene's awareness regionally and nationally. My goal is to highlight sports in Jackson, the state of Mississippi, and nationally by utilizing my 25 years of Division I athletic administration knowledge, and my guests will be experienced leaders in sports. The guest on the show will share a behind-the-scenes, unique, and informative glance of the world of sports. Please join me every Monday and Friday.